The Cave Scroll collection, accidentally found by a Bedouin sheepherder, is the greatest manuscript discovery of all time. With texts written in Hebrew, Greek and Aramaic, this vast ancient library spans across 11 caves in Qumran. Near to the Dead Sea, with its perfect, preserving atmosphere of saltiness, aridity and low altitude, these remarkably intact 800 fragmentary scrolls form the monumental archaeological wonder known as the Dead Sea Scrolls. The Dead Sea Scrolls consists of sectarian, apocryphal and pseudepigraphal texts, which make up about 3/4 of the entire library. However, the scrolls are most well known for the 1/4 of the texts, which contain fragments of every book of the Hebrew Bible, bar Esther. This reveals a much earlier tradition of transcribing the Hebrew Bible than previously known. You see, in the 6th to the 10th century AD, the Masoretes were the Jewish scribes that copied the Old Testament by transcription, creating what is known as the Masoretic text, which is what popular versions of the Bible use to translate the Old Testament usually. So think of the KJV or the ESV. And this discovery of the Dead Sea Scrolls was not only significant for the scholarly world, but for Christians worldwide, as the earliest copies of the Old Testament, once dated to the 10th century, were now dated around 1,000 years earlier than the Masoretic texts. Not only that, but Christians claim that the Masoretic texts reflect the Hebrew scriptures found in the scrolls at Qumran. They claim that what we have in our modern Bibles is what we see in the Dead Sea Scrolls, and that this proves some sort of spiritual significance, but also proves about the reliability of the Bible, in that it is accurate and hasn't changed. How true is this claim, though? That thought stirs the majority of contemporary discussions surrounding the Dead Sea Scrolls, and forms the basis of our research question. To what extent do the Dead Sea Scrolls prove the reliability of the Bible? Briefly, some contemporary discussion recently is Wes Huff on the Joe Rogan podcast claimed word-for-word accuracy between the Masoretic text and 1Q Isaiah A, which is the Great Isaiah Scroll, which we'll talk about later. He claimed that they were word for word the same. This is flat out wrong, but this is what sparked the controversy online. Alex O'Connor rebutted it, Wes responded, Gavin Ortland responded to Alex, who responded to this guy, and Dan McClellan also had his say, and we'll mention Dan McClellan later. Now, I fully understand this question of how much does this prove the reliability of the Bible? How much do the Dead Sea Scrolls, to what extent do they prove the reliability of the Bible? We've got to understand what we mean by reliability. It's a good question that not a lot of people are actually sure of the answer to when they make this claim about the Dead Sea Scrolls. In this particular research question, we aren't concerned about the historical reliability of the Bible, like the evidence surrounding the Battle of Jericho. Did the Battle of Jericho happen? No, we're concerned about the scribal accuracy of transcription. To prove the reliability of the Bible in this way, the scribal reliability, we will need to look at one book of the Bible from the Masoretic texts and compare it with the Dead Sea Scrolls equivalent. Now, due to the number of well-preserved papyri making up our focus source, 1Q Isaiah A, or the Great Isaiah Scroll, part of the Dead Sea Scrolls, that's what we're going to centre our research question on, the Book of Isaiah. Following this, it'll also be useful to examine the earliest forms of the Hebrew language to understand how it has changed between the time of Isaiah's writing all the way up until the Masoretic text. So as you can see here, we have the Siloam inscription, which is an old etching. It's a stone artifact with Paleo-Hebrew characters that are etched into it and dated to the time of Isaiah. And On the left there we have the Septuagint, dated to around 300 BC. That's the Greek Old Testament. We'll talk about that in a second. Then we have the Great Isaiah Scroll, the Dead Sea Scrolls, our focus source. Then we have the Masoretic text in the 10th century. And we will consider the Septuagint, that's the one on the left, the Greek Old Testament, and it's likely what 1st century AD Christians would have read and gained understanding of the Old Testament from. It's important to note that since that's a Greek translation of the Hebrew Bible, we will not examine language differences as we will for the Masoretic text, Dead Sea Scrolls and Siloam inscription, but rather we will focus on the general meaning differences, if any, between Septuagint Isaiah and other copies of the book. Evaluating meaning differences, however, will be essential for all of our sources. If major differences in meaning and interpretation come out of these copies, it will be shaky ground for proving reliability of the Bible. However, if the Dead Sea Scrolls do reflect what we see in our modern Bibles, as Willett suggests, then we can be confident in the accuracy of transcription, and rest assured there have been no significant alterations to the text. We'll also consult Dan McClellan, as mentioned before, a biblical scholar who is quite critical of the Christian claim of the Dead Sea Scrolls, despite being somewhat of a Mormon himself. McClellan believes that the Dead Sea Scrolls do not prove the Bible hasn't changed, and in fact believes there are significant variant readings between the Dead Sea Scrolls and the Masoretic text to claim unreliability of the Bible. Analysing and assessing his claims, we will evaluate his perspectives and information regarding the Hebrew language, the Masoretic text, and the Dead Sea Scrolls. In combination with this, the texts themselves, and archaeological sources, we will interpret the data to conclude about the reliability of the Bible. This research will be situated within the framework of the empiricist school of thought. The empiricist method, with its emphasis on systematic analysis of primary evidence, is particularly suited to the comparative study of ancient manuscripts, such as the Masoretic text and the Dead Sea Scrolls. This approach prioritises direct engagement with primary materials, which we will adhere to by focusing almost exclusively on the texts themselves, mostly consulting one scholar, Dan McClellan, as a secondary voice to contextualise the discussion and offer a different perspective. Rather than rely on theological presuppositions, the aim is to let the textual data speak for itself. This includes identifying quantitative patterns, such as the number of variants between the Masoretic text and the Great Isaiah Scroll, which reflects a key empiricist feature: empirical measurability. Got to be able to measure things. Furthermore, we have structured the study across a very broad historical spectrum, drawing from sources dated to approximately 700 BC with the Siloam inscription, 300 BC with the Septuagint, 150 to 100 BC 1Q Isaiah A or the Great Isaiah Scroll, and 900 AD Masoretic text, allowing us to implement the empiricist principle of contextual corroboration. By analysing how the Hebrew language and scribal conventions evolve over this massive 1600-year period, we can critically assess whether differences in the text are meaning differences or merely language differences. Material evidence alone will be our guide in assessing the reliability of biblical transmission, and in the end we will answer the question: to what extent do the Dead Sea Scrolls prove reliability of the Bible? Do they at all? In conclusion, applying the empiricist's approach is actually perfect for this sort of research question, because it doesn't presuppose an outcome, but rather, as Hume says, proportions its belief to the evidence. And that's what we are to look at: the text, whether it's changed, and how much the Dead Sea Scrolls prove the reliability of the Bible. So, using these sources and the empiricist method, we will answer the research question: to what extent do the Dead Sea Scrolls prove the reliability of the Bible? Thank you.